Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the lucky 13th virtual event of the 6th Unbound Book Festival. My name is Becca Hayes, and I'm a member of the Unbound Programming Committee. Tonight's event is First Things First, Debut Novels, and you are in for a captivating evening with three celebrated debut novelists, Kelli Jo Ford, Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai, and Leanne Betasamosake Simpson. As you may know, the festival has been completely free to attend, and this wouldn't be possible without the generosity of the hundreds and hundreds of people who have supported us financially over the years. On behalf of everyone who volunteers for Unbound and everyone who attends these events, we are so grateful to each and every one of you who has been kind enough to give. A list of everyone who has given over the past 2 years is on the website. And if you'd like to contribute yourself, you can do so by going to the website unboundbookfestival.com and clicking on the donate button. We're a registered nonprofit and we're completely run by volunteers, so everything you donate goes directly into putting on these events. Thank you. Support comes too from the City of Columbia, specifically the Office of Cultural Affairs and the Convention and Visitors Bureau. KBIA and Como Magazine are our media sponsors. A full list of our sponsors and supporters is available on the website. Particular thanks to this evening's sponsor, Skylark Bookshop. We're very grateful to them for their support of the festival. Please remember, if you miss an Unbound event, they are available for viewing on both our Facebook page and on YouTube. If you haven't already, please take a minute to review the entire festival schedule on the website and attend as many events as you can fit in. While you're there, you can sign up for the festival newsletter, which goes out on Monday mornings and will keep you up to date on what to expect each week. And please tell your friends about the festival. As you probably know, Unbound is all about audience interaction, and we invite questions from viewers. Just in case you need a little encouragement to participate this evening, we'll be giving away a copy of each of our guests' novels to one lucky questioner to be chosen at random. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce this evening's moderator, Donald Quist. Donald is the author, of the linked story collection For Other Ghosts and the essay collection Harbors. His writing has appeared in North American Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, The Rumpus, and was notable in Best American Essays 2018. He's the creator of the online nonfiction series Past 10 and the co-host of the podcast Black and White and Red All Over. He is currently a Gus T. Riegel Fellow at in the English PhD program at the University of Missouri and is also faculty at the MFA in Writing program at Alma College. So welcome, Donald.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
You too.
Thank you for introducing us. Yeah. Welcome. I am really honored to be able to moderate this panel. The authors we'll hear from this evening prove that success does not come overnight. Realizing one's first published novel takes an extraordinary mix of commitment, passion, sacrifice, and patience. And each of the writers gathered here have been publishing their creative work for years before their debut. We'll chat with them about their motivations, the intentions that led to their first novel, and we'll listen to them discuss their divergent journeys writing, publishing, and promoting their books through extraordinary times. But first, we'll hear each artist read from their debut novel. I'll introduce each person first in alphabetical order. First, we're going to start with Kelli Jo Ford. Kelli Jo Ford's Crooked Hallelujah is a debut novel and stories about 4 generations of Cherokee women. Hybrid Vigor, a story from Crooked Hallelujah, won the Paris Review's 2019 Plimpton Prize. And the manuscript for Crooked Hallelujah won the University of Central Oklahoma's 2019 Everett Southwest Literary Award. Kelli has been awarded a National Artist Fellowship by the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, an Elizabeth George Foundation Emerging Artist Grant, a Joby Paiasano Fellowship, and a Catherine Blake or Bakeless Mason Award in Fiction by the Breadloaf Writers Conference. She served as the Indigenous Writer in Residence at the School are at School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe. She received an MFA from George Mason University. Kelli has work published or forthcoming in the Paris Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, the Missouri Review, as well as the anthology 40 Stories, New Writing from Harper Purnell, among other places. Kelli is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and in addition to work as freelance writer and editor, teaches fiction at Santa Fe's Institute of American Indian Arts Low Residency MFA program. It is such a pleasure to hear from Kelli Jo Ford this evening. How are
Thanks
you?
so much. Oh, I'm good. Thank you so much for the introduction and for joining us in conversation. I'm so happy to be here with you all.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll just jump in, and I'm gonna read from Crooked Hallelujah. I'm gonna read from a story in the first third of the book. It's called The Year 2003 Minus 20, and it takes place in a fictional town called Beulah Springs in the Cherokee Nation in the mid-'80s. The year 2003 minus 20. I, for some reason, that quick math has left me, but I'll just hop right in. Reenie's bones can feel a fight long before the rest of her wakes to the rising voices and clattering bottles. She is 8, almost 9. Granny and Lula live in a new rent house across the tracks and down a long hill, not so very far. Over there, standing on a chair, rolling up balls of dough as Granny's hearing aids whistle, or lying curled in Granny's great body napping is Reenie's best place. But Reenie knows that her place is with her mom. Tonight, Reenie is leaning against a bathroom door jamb with her arms crossed, watching Justine, her mom, and Christy, a junior in high school with permed black hair and thighs that bulge around her cutoffs. The young women dig into a pink suitcase of makeup samples that just arrived in the mail. Emerald Noir, fancy, Christy says, opening a plastic eyeshadow tray. I can't believe you signed up. Wrote a check so it won't cost anybody anything, says Justine. And it, Christy says, and they laugh like bouncing a check is the funniest thing in the world. Reenie doesn't laugh. Just kidding, Justine says, tossing a cotton ball at her. Besides, if I get good at this, we'll be in our own place before you know it. We'll probably get a pink Cadillac and drive to Dallas and dine with Mary Kay herself. I'm definitely skipping school for that, Christy says, bumping Reenie with her butt. I've never seen a vampire. Reenie and Justine rent the 2 upstairs bedrooms of this big, old, rickety house from Christy's mom, who Justine worked with on the line before switching to days. Reenie likes it here okay. Christy lets her come into her room and listen to albums sometimes. She lets her watch television with her and her friends at school, after school. Justine isn't quiet like she was at Granny and Lula's, isn't so mad. Justine makes a V with her fingers. She puts them over Christy's cheeks and tells her to hold still and quit grinning. She colors in dark rouge, first on Christy's cheekbones and then on her own, just the way the lady had shown her. She pulls out a deep maroon lipstick to match the rouge and turns to Reenie. Sure you don't want to get dolled up, Bean? Reenie shakes her head. The lipstick is so dark it looks almost black in the fluorescent light of the bathroom mirror. Doesn't matter. You're the prettiest little Indian I ever did see. Justine rolls her lips together, smoothing the lipstick, and then kisses a piece of toilet paper and hands it to Reenie. Makeup, Justine had said, was just one reason they couldn't live with Granny and Lula, who quoted Timothy so much that Reenie could mouth the entire scripture along with her. In like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety and so on. Reenie could count on Justine to follow with a crack about Timothy's next verse, women staying in silence and subjugation. Then there would be stretches of hard quiet, and they were just better off here, so said Justine. Justine takes the toilet paper and presses her own lips to it, rolls them into the color. She stands on her tiptoes in front of Justine and looks in the mirror, then wipes her lips with the back of her arm. A good time crew from the factory drifts in and out of the house. Cigarette butts transform ashtrays into morning after volcanoes. Reenie turns the ash-dusted tabletops into canvases, tracing hearts in her path when she creeps to the kitchen in morning quiet. Men, some with union money to spare, bring occasional gifts. a bone-handled jackknife, a book of knots, the licks of a bobtailed dog. They fill the house with noise and a sweet-smelling smoke that Renee has come to know. They leave behind safety glasses, a stray sock here or there. One leaves the Waylon and Willie record that Renee keeps stashed beneath her bed. If being with my ex taught me anything, Justine says, it's take not 1 ounce of shit from a man. Justine, who won't call Kenny by name anymore, holds her eyeliner to the flame of a match to soften it before touching it to her eyelid. Thank you.
That was excellent. I was reading along as you were reading and just falling in love again with just the voice of these stories in novel form. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Looking forward to talking more. But first, we're going to talk to Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai, the author of The Mountains Sing, as well as 11 prior books in Vietnamese and English. She has received some of the top literary awards in Vietnam, including the 2010 Poetry of the Year Award from the Hanoi Writers Association. The Mountains Sing is the winner of the 2020 Lanham Literary Award Fellowship, a New York Times Editor's Choice, and NPR's Best Book of 2020, among others. And according to the New York Times Book Review, The Mountains Sing is, quote, a novel that, in more than one sense, remedies history. Quế Mai has a PhD in creative writing from the United Kingdom and currently divides her time between Indonesia and Vietnam. So excited to have her here with us tonight. How are you?
Hi, Donald. Thank you so much for your wonderful moderation.
Oh, thanks.
I want to extend my sincere thanks to all the people who volunteer for this festival and to our audience and donors. And it's my great honor to be here. I love the work of Leanne and Kelly, and I'm so excited to be speaking with them. So my novel, The Mountains Sing, is a story of the 20th century history of Vietnam via the lives of 4 generations of a Vietnamese family. Is told in the voices of Grandma Diệu Lan and her granddaughter Hương. And Hương, when we meet Hương in the novel, her parents have gone to war to fight, against the Southern Vietnamese and also the Americans. And so her father left first, and her mother followed. And here's Hương alone in Hanoi, missing her parents. So I just want to read a little bit in Hương voice what her thoughts are. I miss my parents dearly. During the years that she was gone, I imagined seeing my mother again every day. I imagined disappearing into her embrace, into the river of her hair, into her soft breast. I imagine our voices rising like kites from under the shade of our new bang tree. I miss how my mother had filled our home with her singing voice, how gracefully she'd dance, how she'd led me along by my fingers, twirling me around so my shirt would flare. Whenever I was sad, I told myself to be strong like my mother. She never cried or showed fear. Once we found a snake under our bed, and while I stood there shaking, she bent and picked it up by the tip of its tail, flinging it out of the open window. By the beginning of 1975, rumors spread that the war was really ending, and I imagined my mother flying me down the streets of Hanoi on the back of Grandma's bicycle. We could scream at the top of our lungs as the bike rushed us into a brilliant summer, into the red phượng flowers, into the purple bang lang petals that blossomed above pavements punctured by bomb shelters. We could stop at the leg of the returned sword, delighting at the delirious coldness of Tràng Tiền ice cream. In my dreams, my mother always returned with my father. He was tall and handsome. Sometimes he would rush towards me on his 2 feet. Sometimes he struggled on a single leg, leaning on a crutch. Sometimes he embraced me with his 2 strong arms, and other times he had no arms at all, just 2 lumps of soft flesh protruding from his shoulders. But he always laughed as he called my name. Here is Hương, my daughter. Thank you.
Fantastic. Just love the imagery. It transports me every time. Thank you for your work. So glad you were here. And looking forward to talking to you more in a bit. Next up, we have Leanne Leanne Betasamosake Simpson. Betasamosake Simpson. She is a Nishnabek writer, scholar, and musician, and a member of the Alderville First Nation. She's the author of Nopaming, The Cure for White Ladies, as well as several previous books, including Islands of Decolonial Love, The Gift is in the Making, Dancing on Our Turtles' Backs, As We Have Always Done, Indigenous Freedom Through Radical Resistance, which was awarded Best Subsequent Book by the Native American Indigenous Studies Association, and the book This Accident of Being Lost, which was longlisted for CBC Canada Reads, a Best Book of the Year by the Globe and Mail, National Post, and Quill and Choir. Leanne has released 2 albums, including Flight, which is a companion piece to This Accident of Being Lost, her book A Short History of the Blockade, Giant Beavers, Diplomacy, and Regeneration in the Nishnabewin, is forthcoming from the University of Alberta Press in 2021. And her new project, a collaboration with Robin Maynard, Rehearsals for Living, Conversations on Abolition and Anti-Colonialism, is forthcoming from Knopf, Canada in 2022. It is my pleasure to welcome Leanne.
Ani Kinawaya, it's amazing to be here tonight on this panel of brilliance, and I appreciate everyone who's tuned in to Unbound tonight to share time and space with us. I'm going to read from the very beginning of Nopaming. Nopaming is a word that means in the bush, and this very first part of the book, it's a song. You can find it at Bandcamp on the album Nopaming Sessions, and it's also a short film by Sammy Chien, who's a Taiwanese-Canadian new media artist from East Vancouver. So this is the beginning of the book. Solidification. Once you move through cold, there is Pacific. Once you move through Pacific, there is placid. Once you move through placid, there is a condition of expanse. And it was in that condition of expanse that held me. I heard them singing above me. Mashkawaje fell through the ice to find quiet, to get out of the wind, to visit with Namegos. They all sang, Mashkawaje stitches up the hole. They are so cold they can't move. They are frozen stiff. The lake is their blanket. They all sang, Mashkawaje is frozen stiff, still, calm. No one knows if they're coming back. They all sang, Akewenze is fishing through the ice with a spear. They brought a line of beads. They will wait patiently. They will wait patiently until Mashkawaje is done their visit. The singing and drumming came every night from a distance. Different choirs every evening at dusk, marking the passage of time, reminding me there is still love. You see, tragedy happened again. The details don't matter because the details are hopeless, overwhelmed, shut down. Know this. After 2 years, the best parts of me are still frozen in the lake. My limbic system, its best friend, the prefrontal cortex, and the hollow pumping organ in which I keep benevolence. The only one that regularly comes to visit is Akawenze. In the winter, they park their chuck on the ice, drill a hole with the auger, and fish until the cold makes their bones crack. As soon as the ice is off the lake, Akawenze is back in their boat with a torch and a sort of pitchfork for spearing pickerel. In the dead of summer, Akawenze sneaks back before first light in their canoe, before the cottagers and their jet skis are out. In the fall, they sprinkle tobacco around me and sing. My world is muted. I look out. If something upsets me, I just wait, and the upset passes. I sit beside. Sometimes I remember the other me before I was frozen in the lake. I remember caring and engaging and the sharpness of unmuted feeling. I remember hopeless connection. I don't feel stuck, in part because I don't feel anything. Their song isn't wrong. The ice is like a warm weighted blanket. My form dissolved when tragedy came, and if I am fluid, the ice is container. There are ashes in my eyes. I'm so far inside myself, like Misquadesi on a full fast inside time, pulled inside their organs, inside their turtle shell, inside the sediments of the lake, while the ice world forms on top, oblivious to the outside with body as lake. And there is solace in being cut off, and there is freedom enmeshed within that state. Know this, being frozen in the lake is another kind of life. Know this, it is unclear how long before I will be done with my visit. It's unclear how long visiting takes. Know this, visiting is more of a dance than an event. Akawenze is my will. Nenatic is my lungs. Minamoya is my conscience. Sabe is my marrow. Hatik is my nervous system. Asin, my eyes and ears. Lucy is my brain. I believe everything these seven say because ice distorts perception and trust replaces critique, examination, and interrogation. I believe everything these seven say, even though. I believe everything these seven say, even though their truths are their own, not mine. I believe in the absence of my own heart, I will accept the hearts of these seven. The geese fly overhead in the sheer grace of a carefully angled formation designed to take them elsewhere. There are still stars. There are still stars. Thank you.
Wonderful. Just enamored of the syntax and the way it's crafted and just perfectly pulls us into the rest of the book. Thank you so much, Leanne.
Thank you.
Glad to see everyone here. What I wanted to do is, I guess, start with where these books began, where they sort of came from. And so I wanted to chat with each of you and start first with like individual questions and kind of build upwards into more like shared questions. And so I wanted to start with Kelli and just simply ask, what was the impetus behind Crooked Hallelujah? Where did it come from? Why? Yeah.
Sure. The book isn't strictly autobiographical, but it was certainly inspired by growing up in a family, 4 generations of women, and being that kid who slept with my great grandmother, who took care of me a lot while my grandmother worked, and my very young mother was out trying to get factory jobs. And convince people she was old enough to work. So I grew up in this family of really powerful, fierce, funny women who stuck really close with each other out of necessity and just out of like that's who they were. And so having that, and that's what I knew, that's just what I knew. And then later I realized that was really lucky, it was really kind of a tremendous blessing. And these women, and it wasn't just the four of us. My mom had sisters, some of whom had left the house, some hadn't, but they were always in and out. And then we had a boatload of cousins who were there because my great grandmother was really just the matriarch of the family and drew us all there. So later when I left Oklahoma and that wasn't the case, I just always, I've come to think that if I was going to be making art in every way, I was going to be looking toward them, because I feel like I've been carried by these women, my mom, my aunties, my grandmothers, like my whole life, really. And still, if I get in a room with them, I want to get them talking and telling stories, and I want to listen to them. And that's how it's been since I was little. So yeah, so it's very much inspired by some pretty amazing women that I got to be raised by.
Excellent. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Quế Mai, I wanted to ask, when did you know you wanted to write a novel? Because you had been like producing books for years. So when did you decide, okay, this is the time?
I have loved reading fiction since I was a little girl, and fiction opened the world in the way that I didn't expect. And I always wanted to use the power of imagination to re-erect the past, the forgotten past, the past that we rarely speak about in Vietnam because of censorship reasons. I also wanted to imagine how it was for my grandmothers. Both of them had died before I was born, so I wanted to have a grandmother. So, since a young girl, I told myself I would one day write a novel to have a grandmother. And it took me so many years. I researched for this book my whole life, and I think I wrote it when I was older. And by that time, I have traveled a lot. I have spoken to a lot of people. I have read a lot of novels, and I didn't find a novel that I wanted to read about Vietnamese history that centers on the voices of the women. Like Kelly's work, I center the mountain sing on the voices of women, because if you look at literature about Vietnam, mostly it's told via the Western lens, or the viewpoints of men. And Vietnamese women in literature about Vietnam in English often appear as victims, as weak, as absent of trauma, as simple as prostitutes. And I wanted to present the women who surrounded me when I was growing up in Vietnam, the women who had to bear the burden of history and remain to be the pillar of our families, of our society. Yeah, so there were so many reasons I had to write this novel.
Excellent. Fantastic. Moving on to you, Leanne, I'm curious because you also have had several books published and worked across many different mediums. So when thinking about your debut, why a novel? How did you decide that this was the form that you needed this to take, that you wanted your work to go into?
I wanted to write a longer form, and I wanted to take, I think, a lot of the ideas and practices and ethics that I write about in nonfiction and in academic work, and I wanted to build a world where the same sorts of interventions were being made. I had written 2 books of short stories, Islands of Decolonial Love and This Accident of Being Lost, and I fell in love with a couple of those characters that I've pulled into Nopaming. so I didn't necessarily set out to write a novel, or that's what my publishers call it. I wanted to write something that was more in depth and a longer form. I wanted to spend more time with these characters and telling stories. I wanted to build an Anishinaabe world in the present, and have this collapsing of the past and the future together to create a present. And so I think that longer form made sense for this work and for this story.
Excellent. Thinking about how each of your books are very different, not only in structure but in tone, they're all unified by reclamation and reconciliation and themes around that. And preparing for this panel, I've been thinking just about how the very act of being women writers of color is in itself like an act of resistance against white hegemony and colonial rule. But you all take it even further. You actively engage with, and I'm gonna, these are words that came from Quế Mai in the email exchange earlier, but you're actively engaging in like decolonizing literature. Thinking about that focus, and all of you kind of touched on this, I'm curious how each of you view your debut novel in conversation with your larger body of work and your goals as an artist. I remember, Kelly, you said making art in every way. So I was hoping each of you could speak on this. What is your debut novel in context of the culmination of your work and your goals and what you're trying to do?
I don't know. I feel like almost all my body of work is really my debut novel. I feel like it almost all went in there, because from the very first story I wrote, I was writing these characters in these places. I didn't know it. They may have had different names, but their situations and who they were was very much the same. And so I think that was just sort of like drilling down deep, trying to understand what I was trying to do. And so for me, like what the book was an exercise in, like, I approached each piece trying to write just one short story. I wanted to be able to write one good short story. And once I finished one, would write another one. And I was surprised for quite a while that they were coming from the same places and eventually the same families. So the book for me was just kind of an exercise in letting the work guide me and try to understand what it was trying to be, and then try to find like the cohesiveness of these pieces, and help find the larger narrative that was trying to come out. So I feel like the book really is my body of work, but I would love to hear what Quế Mai and Leanne have to say, because I know that they have great bodies of work.
Thank you, Kelly. I think what I wrote before The Mountain Sing set up the foundation for The Mountain Sing. It broadened my understanding, my inquiry into my personal history, my family's history, and the history of Vietnam, and what I want, how I could make sense of all of our difficult experiences. And like you said, Donald, this book is an act of resistance. It resists against the temptation to please the Western audience. Because if you read this book, you notice that my name appears in full toner mark. So people can't say it, people can't remember it. And there are, I have more than 20 characters in the book, and, all of their names appear in full toner marks. And it's a challenge for the Western audience to remember those names, but it also challenged their privileges. I think the mainstream culture have expected us as minority writers to serve them, to please them. But I think I write this book to invite, the majority reader to enter my culture, to have an authentic taste of the Vietnamese culture. and to be a part of that culture, because I want to serve you an authentic meal with chili, lemongrass, and ginger, you know.
Yeah.
So this book, writes against a lot of misconceptions, misrepresentations of Vietnam. For example, Vietnam is often seen as a war, although we are a country so rich in cultural heritage. Like we have more than 4,000 years of history. And our literary traditions are just so amazing. I wanted to present this in this novel, and it is an act of resistance, definitely.
Excellent. Yeah. Leanne, how is this a culmination, or is it? How does it speak to your other works? And you kind of mentioned that these characters have appeared before.
I think I spend a lot of time outside. I spend a lot of time on the land. I spend a lot of time doing Anishinaabe things on the land, like making maple sugar and harvesting wild rice and hunting and making medicines. And that, for me, that's a very generative practice, creatively and artistically and intellectually. And I had a lot of trouble getting my head around the structure of a novel, because it's a very Western literary tradition. And I come from an Anishinaabe oral storytelling tradition, and the aesthetics are different. And we have some amazing Anishinaabe novelists for sure, but our stories don't conform to the same sorts of things that a Western novel conforms to in terms of conflict and protagonist and antagonist and plot. And so I really wanted to write something that built an Anishinaabe world. I wanted something that used Anishinaabe aesthetics to layer meaning into the text and into that world. My language is very poetic, and so the poetry sort of spills out of the words, and so I wanted to have those elements in it. When Anishinaabe people are telling stories, sometimes it's a story, sometimes it seems like poetic, sometimes it's a song, sometimes you end up doing something. And so I wanted to have that kind of element. There's a lot of space in the book. So it's almost, in building this world, I think that the reader has to maybe change the way that they read, and maybe the reading becomes more of a listening. And I think that that's really related to the rest of my work and the different interventions and the different things that I'm trying to do. But also it's a jumping off point as well, I think. And I think I did really fall in love with some characters from my earlier work and wanted to spend more time with them.
Fantastic. I'm thinking about how all three of your novels never allowed me to enter into a position of complacency. All three challenged me to pay attention, to figure things out on my own. And so like I couldn't just sit. It was an active engagement with the text. I think a lot of that also came through because so much is left in a way untranslatable. And I was curious, like in the process of working on these books, working with editors, how do you articulate that this is important? I don't want to spoon feed this to the reader. I want the reader to be able to make the effort to try to understand what I'm presenting to them. If anyone would like to jump in there.
I think that that's something, at least in Canada, that I'm known for. So I think that I don't think that publishers and editors were surprised at that. But I think one of the things that when the manuscript was finished, I had a very good experience at the House of Anansi Press with Damien Rogers as the editor of This Accident Being Lost. And so in the negotiation of that book, I wanted her to be the editor on this book because of all of the conversations that we had around those kinds of issues around accessibility. And I really wanted to write to an Indigenous audience, to an Anishinaabe audience. That's always been a really important ethical practice for me. And that doesn't mean that non-Indigenous folks can't read my work or find meaning in my work, but it shifts how you're writing, and it shifts the story, and it shifts the tone. And so I think that that's been something that's been really, really valuable for me. I think that if you work a little bit, you can find the answers and you can place things together. And I think that that's also that's I think what we should be doing when we engage with art. And I think when you produce something that requires presence and requires a little bit of work and requires reflection and critical thought, I think that's a really great relationship to have with an audience.
Absolutely.
You know, like Leanne, Leanne's book is just amazing in the way that it it protects the oral story traditions of your people, and in the Mountain Sing, I want to protect our literary or our oral story traditions too. And I've been really lucky that I have a fantastic agent, Julie Stevenson, and a fantastic editor, Betsy Clyde at Algonquin Books. I must say that, for an author of color who comes from a faraway place like myself, to have a voice to say, I need champions who are out there opening the door for me. And I'm really grateful for so many people, librarians, teachers, booksellers. I want to highlight, Sky Lark Store, who's sponsoring, this festival. I mean, doing this festival, booksellers, indie booksellers are doing fantastic job there, putting themselves at risk, distributing books so that we can keep literature alive. So I'm grateful for so many people. And I don't blame the publishing world for not having enough diversity. I think there should be more need, there should be more investment in translations, for example, like we have so many great books from Vietnam. But I mean, the Western audience or the international audience doesn't have access to them because we don't have a translation fund. We don't have enough translators. So I worked for years voluntarily as a translator, and I hope with my book I can, bring more opportunities for Vietnamese literature because we have so much to show the world.
Yeah. And this is something I admire about all of your books. Each of you, there are points in each book where you point to another voice, another writer, another artist. You show that there is a tradition, there is a body of work, and you invite the reader to seek this out, to find these voices. Excellent. And yeah, Kelly, on that note, yeah, if you want to add on that, yeah.
Sure. I was interested from the beginning in writing a book that was about place as much as about this family. And I think that that's one thing if people come to the book expecting this sort of like traditional novel, that can be a challenge. And I think, as you mentioned, like you said, with all of our books that you felt like you needed to sort of stay engaged. You couldn't really go on auto drive and just follow along and see what happens. And so I think that is something that was important to me in that, obviously I want readers to be deeply engaged with the work and to be thoughtful about it, but I wanted to be focusing on place, and I wanted a multitude of voices. And there was talk as I worked on the book for so many years. Really, I did. I had an incredibly patient agent. And there was talk about having a more slim kind of book that just focused on the two generations of Justine and Renee. but I just I could never get away from the fact that I couldn't tell Rini, the youngest girl, eventually woman's story without telling the story of her mom and her great grandmother. And I couldn't tell, her mom's story without telling the grandmother's story. And so even though mostly it's Justine and Rini's story, those other stories are just important, and they're not digressions. And I think that they certainly can be taken that way. There was a version of the book that didn't have the great grandmother's. There's a journal entry from her as a chapter story, the Annie Mae chapter. And then there's also a story where the main Justine is sort of a side character. It's a purely place-based story, and that felt like the whole of the piece to me. There's a version out there that actually we submitted to Grove that didn't have those stories in it, because I thought, okay, sure, we can take those out. Like, it makes sense to try to tighten things up. And then once I was working with my editor, I couldn't get them out of, they felt like they needed to be in there. So I said, what do you think about these? And so I worked them back in there. And it makes for perhaps a less tidy book, but I think that feels true to the story and necessary.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I wanted to applaud all of you, and one of the things I really appreciated as a person of color, I had a visceral reaction reading each of your books in terms of me crying. And sometimes there were moments where I actually had to put each of your books down and clap. And part of that came from the fact that, and this actually speaks to an epigraph at the start of Leanne's book from Fred Moten. And Fred Moten says, anybody who thinks that they can understand how terrible the terror has been without understanding how beautiful the beauty has been against the grain of terror is wrong. And in each of your texts, you are sure to show that there are moments of grace and love and compassion and beauty in the face of colonization, war, and occupation. And so I just was curious, how intentional, how important was that to sort of show a community in full as you were writing these texts? We could start with Kelly.
Sure. I feel like I had an immediate response to that question. I'm like, let me go here. Again, during the process of pulling the book together and looking at the stories and thinking, there was a point where I got the feedback from a reader that, boy, this is a really dark stretch here in the book. This is kind of a tough hang, I guess. And it was really a surprise to hear that, which, there's some certainly trauma in the book and domestic violence and all kinds of stuff. But I was surprised to hear that, because for me, what is at the heart of almost every story is the relationship between these women. And so these other things that are happening are important to the story and important in shaping their experience and their lives. But for me, the perseverance of love and through the generations, and the determination to not just survive, but to make sure that each successive generation is lifted up, which all 4 generations are doing. That's what the story's about. And so I was even surprised to hear that someone felt it was a dark story, because that's not the story to me. I see that, but that's not where I feel like the heart of it lies.
I think regardless of how hard life is, there is always hope. There's always beauty. My mom told me that during the war, when the bombings were horrible and she had to flee her village, taking along her students to hide away in another village far away, there were farmers who opened the doors to her and her students and asked them to come sleep and gave them food for free. Such beauty of passion, I wanted to capture in this book, because regardless of how difficult how much difficulty we face, if we look closely enough, there are always people who pick us up and help us. Yeah, so I think that's also the message of this book, the message of kindness, the message of hope and of peace.
I think for me, it was, well, the epitaph was very deliberate, and that focusing on Indigenous joy was very deliberate because I think that Indigenous folks have enough trauma and enough violence in our lives. And I know as a reader, that's the last thing that I want to read, because I have to live it. And so I wanted a reprieve, and I wanted a refuge, and I wanted to still be truthful in terms of the story, but have the trauma and the tragedy maybe on the margins this time. And also that's sort of an intervention into the kinds of things that big publishers in Canada publish right now. There's a lot of emphasis on memoirs. There's a lot of emphasis on trauma, a lot of residential school stories. And while I think those stories are very, very important, I think there's a diversity in Indigenous literature, particularly for Indigenous and non-white audiences, that we don't get to read and that doesn't get into print. And so I really wanted to have as much focus on joy and love and strength as I could. And it's also, as the writer, I got to spend a lot of time in that space, which felt really nice.
Yeah, I want to thank each of you for that, because reading all your books, just as a Black man in the United States, it was I finished each book feeling hopeful, and like as Leanne said, there's just so much trauma around all the time. It was nice to be reminded that there is joy as well, there is hope as well, and that like my narrative doesn't have to be one of forever trauma. There's other things in there too. We have some questions from the audience, so I'm going to pose those to you. The first we have here is from Lisa. Lisa asked, what were your greatest hurdles and successes in both the writing process and getting published? And so maybe we can start with, Kelly.
Kelly, you are muted.
Oh,
I knew I was going to do that. Thank you. Greatest hurdles for me, figuring out how to structure the book and understanding the story. I went back and forth with a lot of things. I thought about starting with the ending. And so if you've read the book, you know that would be a drastically different story if it started there. But just understanding the structure, and I really did need a lot of help from my agent and editors. So it was a big hurdle. Successes, I don't know. I just feel like being here now, having, I worked on the book without realizing I was working on a book for almost 14 years or something. So just having continued to go back to it and try to understand the story and keep going, because I was telling my story and I didn't really realize it for a long time.
Great.
The greatest hurdle for me is to write this in English, which is my second language. So I had to use the dictionary, and a lot of the time I had to manage to find a way to express, some Vietnamese phrase in English, because I wanted my characters to act, to think, to speak the Vietnamese ways. I would say the greatest gift I have received is that two of my readers, two daughters, decided to reconnect with their parents after reading my book.
Oh, that's
It's
fantastic.
just amazing, because these Vietnamese, diasporic Vietnamese readers could not accept the traumatic behaviors of their parents, how they were treated. And when they read my book, they said they understood what their parents must have gone through. So one of the readers lived in London, reached out to the father whom she hadn't spoken for so long. And for the first time, he showed her pictures of his past in Vietnam and talk about the war and how it affected her. And recently, a reader in Los Angeles, reached out to her mom, and so it's just unbelievable. Thank you.
Leanne?
I think the biggest hurdle was getting the book outside of Canada, actually. And so this is, I think, the first festival that I've participated in the US. And it's the first time that I've had fiction that's been published in the US. And so that's really, I guess that's also a success. But it was a hurdle as well to sort of build a new audience and a different audience outside of Canada. My favorite thing about releasing art in the world is sort of seeing how it travels through the world. And with the pandemic, that was also a challenge to see if it would travel or sort of be so disconnected to audiences and to readers. But I think the book has also spawned some other artistic projects with some short films and some musical projects. And so I think that I feel good about that, because I like to sort of continue to work with these same kind of ideas in different mediums and engaging with audiences in different ways.
Excellent. I'm excited to see what comes from this book. I'm ready. We have a question from Joe, who just finished his first novel, and he wants advice, or wonders, what advice do you have for writers like him based on your experience with publishing your debut novel? So any advice for Joe?
First of all, congratulations on finishing your first novel, Joe, and I wish you the best of luck. My advice would be to, if you haven't got an agent, look for a great agent, because agents do much more than they are known for. My agent, for example, really champions the voice of diverse authors. She's done a lot more than she's done outside her contract duties. And also, I think be patient, because I think for me, I worked many years on my manuscript before sending it out, because a lot of time you only have one chance at an agent that you like, or one chance at an editor. So you want to send your best work out there and look for the people who really believe in your work. I mean, it's one thing about getting published, but it's another thing to be published by the people who really believe in you, and then they'll put everything behind championing you, and they will drive you out for much further. Yeah, so good luck and have fun.
I think one thing that's really supported me or really helped me is to build sort of a community around your writing, so that you can get support and feedback and cheerleading and encouragement outside of sort of the industry. I think that's really important. And I've also had really great relationships over a number of years with small independent publishers who've really, I think, supported my artistic and creative visions. And that's been very, very beneficial for me as a writer.
Mm-hmm. And along with community, I would say yes. Find a good first reader. If you can marry a poet, that's what I did, and so I've got a really good first reader in the house. And it's just I'm so lucky to have someone who's been with my work almost as long as I have, and is such a sharp reader and so good with language. So if you can, marry a poet, and if not, just find a good first reader.
Excellent. We have a question from Gwendolyn. Curious, and this is specifically for Quế Mai and Leanne. Gwendolyn is wondering if writing poetry informed the writing of both of your novels.
I think I would like to think that The Mountain Sing is my big poem. The title is the title of a poem itself. The mountains represent the tremendous, the many turbulent events that Vietnamese people have experienced in our history. The singing is about the resilience, the courage, the hope. So I think I love to weave poetry into fiction, and I think if you read poets like Ocean Vuong, who wrote the novel On Earth We Are Gorgeous, you will see the difference in the language, and I just admire poets who I've learned a lot from poets over the years. So I've tried. I think being a poet has taught me a lot of things, and it has helped me a lot with writing my novel.
Yes, I think I've also learned a lot from poetry and poets, and also lyricists. And there's a lot of poetry in Nopaming. I think that there's two records that have come out of it: the Nopaming Sessions, which is a collaboration with my sister Ansley Simpson, who's a singer-songwriter in Toronto. And then I'm about to release a full-length record on vinyl and digital from You Changed Records on March 12th. That's that middle section of the book. And there's songs and poetry on that record. So I think, absolutely, I think there's an economy to poetry that's beautiful and challenging, and it's vital.
Excellent. I have a question from Karen, and I think Kelly could probably help us with this. But Karen is wondering, in writing your novels, what advice would you give to a beginning writer who would like to write a novel based on people and circumstances in the writer's life? How to begin such an endeavor?
This is going to sound flippant because sometimes my words just do, but get a good community support. Get a therapist sooner than later, I would say. Honestly, writing characters who are inspired by the people who I love and admire so deeply, and who carried me. It was a struggle to understand that responsibility, and to even feel like I had even feel like it was something that was okay for me to do. So I really think that it's something that you want to think about deeply, because it's an art, and also it's a great responsibility as well. And from there, because if you're writing a character, your allegiance needs to be to the character. So you've got to kind of if you want to write a good story, your allegiance needs to be the character and story. So you got to find your path through that, because those can be two contradictory things. And I think that's one reason it took me a long time, was to understand the weight of what I was doing, and my whether or not it was even something that was okay to do, I think. Yeah.
This, I'm going to kind of piggyback on that. How do you figure out that it's okay to do? Do you ever really?
I don't know. I had to find peace with it. I felt like the women in the story, it was a celebration of the women in the story, and it didn't mean that I was writing these perfect people who weren't allowed to be characters and make their own mistakes and sometimes fail one another. But it was ultimately always, I felt like, a celebration of them. And still, it was, but I shared the book with my mom before I sent it out, and we talked about it, and it was a heavy thing, but also a beautiful thing, to share and work through and talk about. And really, you know, again, like they're just proud of me, you know. So yeah, I think that you just try to like sit with yourself and have pure intentions and do your best work, and that's what we can do, I think.
Excellent. We have a few minutes left, and I'm going to try to squeeze in a few more questions here. Matt would like to know, who are the writers that influenced you most? So, for each of you, we can start with Leanne. Who influences you?
I think Norbesi Philip, Dion Brandt. I think those are two pretty important influences for me. I also think that my generation, our generation of Indigenous writer, particularly in Canada, has inherited an Indigenous writing community that was built by a generation of women that went before me. So folks like Maria Campbell and Lee Miracle spent a lot of time writing, but also spent a lot of time mentoring, teaching, building programs, starting presses, all of these kinds of things. And so I think that influence is really important too, because I think they could have just spent their time writing novels, but they put so much into the artistic community around them. And my generation of Indigenous writer and this new generation that's coming up so beautifully is really inheriting a lot of their labor and a lot of their work. So I'm very, very grateful for that as well.
What about you, Quế Mai?
For me, the poets of Vietnam have influenced my writing a lot. For example, you know, the poet Nguyễn Duy, who wrote an epic book called The Tale of Kiều. It's a book which is written about the life of Kiều in more than 3,000 verses of poetry. And another Vietnamese poet who influenced, whom I greatly admire, is Hồ Xuân Hương, who wrote about taboo subjects, you know, in poetry. And in English, one of the writers who have influenced me is Becca Hayes, whose second novel, The Committed, was released yesterday. So if you haven't got a copy of his book, check it out. His first novel, The Sympathizer, won the Pulitzer Prize, and it breaks all the boundaries because he challenges the viewpoints of us readers about refugees. In his second book, for example, he views refugees as heroes. He refused to call both people as both people because they are not victims, they are not pitiful, they are heroes for surviving that kind of journey. And Việt Thanh Nguyên, you know, it has been doing so much for the community. He built a network, a divine network to support the voices of Vietnamese own voice stories. So he's been doing amazing things. And I just admire authors who do things for other authors. Because, you know, we are not here alone in literature. I think with literature, we need a rich diversity community who champion each other so that, you know, we have more voices, we have more great stories to enter readers.
A book I went back to over and over again through the years as I was working on Crooked Hallelujah was Love Medicine. You know, I love all of Louise Erdrich's novels, everything I've read of hers. It just, I love it. It's like technically amazing, full of heart and intelligence and important, just important work. But Love Medicine to me it's the perfect book because you can take each story. First of all, when I encountered that book, I encountered it as a collection of linked stories. And then I realized, like talking to other people, like, no, they just encountered it as a novel. And that's the beauty of it. I think you can take each story out as a sort of a complete movement, which is what I look for in a short story, something that feels like a complete movement that resonates. And each of those does that so beautifully. And you put them together and you just get this big story of this family and this place. And that's just always what I was reaching toward. Louise Erdrich and that love medicine in particular is something that has just carried me through the years. Other things, books that I was exposed to, I think early on when I realized that people could write about the places that I wasn't necessarily getting in textbooks or whatever magazine I was picking up, were writers like Brees DJ Pancake. He's writing about West Virginia, like rural life, and Bonnie Jo Campbell, Ron Rash, different short story writers who are just like steeped in place and such a specific place that these characters couldn't be anywhere else. And I've always been drawn to that kind of work that's deeply of a land.
Well, I think we might be over time, or I think it's time to kind of wind down. But I just want to thank each of you for your insight, for sharing yourselves, for your work. I will sneak this in. We had a comment from Greg, and Greg said, all of your books are amazing. Thank you. Healing, oh so needed now, seem to be central in each. And I think it helped engender the hope that I had mentioned, Donald. And Greg is so looking forward to your next books, and so am I. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Hey, Becca, I think you might be muted.
All right, well, let me try that all again. All right, take two. Speaking of Greg, Barbie, Greg, you are the winner, tonight's winner of the books. So please go ahead and email mail@unboundbookfestival.com to claim your books. Thank you so much to Kelli, Quế Mai, Leanne, and Donald for that wonderful conversation. Thanks again to this evening's sponsor, Skylark Bookshop. And on Tuesday, March 9th, we'll be back with a poetry reading featuring Tyree Day, Jennifer Chang, and Rosanna Warren. Have a good night, y'all.